We're on page 26, and we're about to talk about major key signatures, the topic of section 4.3. Just a quick note, I'm going to be bouncing around a little bit in the text with this section because I think it makes a bit more sense to present these ideas in a slightly different order than as they appear in the textbook. So just a quick recap. You recall from the previous section, I'm just going to erase a little bit of this, that when you were building your scales on various notes, you were writing in sharps individually, just in front of one note in particular, based on what you wanted from the pattern of half steps and whole steps. So that is one way of writing a major scale, but it's not ultimately the correct or proper way to do it. So what I'm going to do is to show you the proper way to write a major scale, which is on page 27. So here's the little summary. When composers are writing out major scales, they don't write the individual sharps in front of individual notes. So for instance, we don't have a little sharp there, we don't have a little sharp there. Instead, what they do is to summarize all of the notes that are going to be sharped in a key signature. This is our key signature, and it appears at the beginning of each line of music. So what that means is that the composer essentially is taking any and all sharps that appear in front of individual notes and just populating them into the key signature. Now, this is shorthand to say that, look, you're going to have a bunch of notes in this piece, and anytime you come across an F, I want you to play it as an F sharp, and anytime you come across a C, I want you to play it as a C sharp. Now, I'm going to note these two things. I'm going to clear this off and illustrate a couple of important points about this. So in this case, we knew that from a D major scale, we wanted an F sharp and a C sharp. Now, when we look at the key signature, notice how that first sharp is indeed living exactly where an F would live on the treble clef staff. These are in the same exact location. Notice how the second sharp is living exactly where a C would live on the treble clef staff. So those are in the same location. And now here's another thing. Even though, yes, this sharp is living on that particular F, and we know that there are other Fs on the treble clef, and certainly other Fs in many other clefs, and even though this is living on that particular C, what that means is that all Fs and Cs will be played as F sharps and C sharps. Doesn't matter if it's this one down here, which is a C, doesn't matter if it is this one way the heck up there, which is an F, all of them will be played as F sharps and C sharps. So it's a pretty convenient abbreviation, in fact. We're not writing out individual sharps in front of each individual note. Instead, everything is summarized right here in a key signature. Okay, now let's go back and talk a little bit about major keys. So this is on the previous page. So here's a little definition. So if you have a piece that uses the notes of the D major scale, so in other words, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, and D, and it emphasizes the note D in some or multiple ways. It could be by repeating the D, it could be by extending the D's length, in other words, stressing it through duration, maybe ending the piece on the note D, or using a bunch of stuff that's beyond the scope of this class. If it does that stuff, the piece is said to be in the key of D major. Okay, now this is where we bring in a little example to illustrate the point. So we said, again, it uses the notes of the D major scale, and it somehow emphasizes the note D. So what I ask you to do in this next exercise, which is at the top of page 27, is just to analyze a little bit Wood Duck, which is one of the pieces in the back of the book. So I'm going to pull that up now. This is page 106. So let's take a look, first of all, at the notes of the piece, and especially the notes of the melody and maybe important bassline notes. Notice how at the beginning we've got a D in the left hand, that's in bass clef, another D, another D. Gosh, these Ds are awfully long, and they're often on the very first two beats of each bar, so there's some amount of emphasis. Oh, looky there, we end on D. The melody, in fact, ends on D. What notes are in the melody? Well, we've got, as we just learned, we've got an F sharp here at the beginning because of that sharp. We have an E, a D, F sharp again, A. Oh, it looks like all of the notes of the right hand, at least, all of them belong to the key of D major, or to the scale of D major, I should say. And in the left hand, we have, again, lots of Ds emphasized. We end in both hands on the note D. Well, it looks like we've satisfied a bunch of our conditions, right? We have an emphasis on D throughout the piece, and we're using, with the exception of this one little tiny note, we're using the notes of the D major scale. So that means Wood Duck is in the key of D major. That is its key. Now, going back, you can fill out the answers at the top of page 27 based on what we were just discussing. Here's the next little tidbit. So from the prior section, we talked a little bit about the pattern of, F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, etc. Here's the thing. Sharps in a key signature always appear in the same order. The order of sharps is always going to be from left to right: F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, E sharp, and B sharp. You need to memorize this immediately. And my little caution here is when reciting them, make sure you say the word sharp after each one. It's going to really help you keep this distinct from the flats, which come later. And if you want to use this silly sentence, fat cats go down alleys eating bread, that's really, really useful. So that means, going back to this order of sharps, that means if you have two sharps in a key signature, it's always going to be F sharp and C sharp, the first two in the order of sharps. Let's say you want 4 sharps in your key signature. Well, they're always going to be F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and D sharp. So you're just selecting, the first 2 or the first 4, depending on the piece. So with this exercise, I encourage you to pause the video and then check back in. I'll explain the answers momentarily. So these, not hard once you've memorized this. Obviously, don't just simply look up at the order of sharps above. Use your hand to cover it and trust your memory. So if you have 4 sharps, they are fat cats go down, or F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp. Make that a little bit clearer. If there are 6 sharps, well, fat cats go down alleys eating. So the first 6 in the order of sharps. And if there's just 1 sharp, what is it going to be? Of course, it's going to be F sharp. And again, say sharp after each one. Write the little sharp symbols for each one. You want to associate this order with sharps. Okay, now when you are writing key signatures, not only do you need the correct sharp, so that fat cats go down alleys eating bread stuff, but they also need to appear in conventional locations on the staff. So, turning the page, when you have, I'm going to skip over Wood Duck, which of course is at the back. When you have a set of sharps in treble clef, they always appear in these locations. Let's break this down. So here's how you want to write them out. F sharp, of course, is the first one. You're going to pick the high F. It lives up here. Yes, this one is also an F, but by convention, we use the higher one. Then we use this particular C. That's our C sharp. Then we go up for a G sharp, down for a D sharp, down for an A sharp, up for an E sharp, and down for a B sharp. So these all, of course, live exactly where they should in terms of letters, and they also follow this conventional pattern. So let me give you a little counterexample. We do not write our sharps like this. We don't just say, oh, well, there's an F sharp, there's a C sharp, there's a G sharp, there's a D sharp, there's an A. No, key signatures do not look like that. They always look something like this. So the way to memorize it is, yes, think of your fat cats going down alleys eating bread, but also think of a slant of 2, a slant of 3, and a slant of 2. That's one way just to get the orientation of all of these notes, all of these sharps in your head. So if we follow that procedure, we think, oh, for that first one, we're going to have to start up high for that F sharp, slant down. Oh, now we're going to start a new slant, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, and then finally another slant. We want an E sharp and a B sharp. So that's how you write your sharps in treble clef. For bass clef, the thing is, they use exactly the same pattern, which we were talking about. Notice how these are kind of in a row of 2, or a slant of 2, a slant of 3, and a slant of 2. It will have the same overall shape, but the sharps themselves will be in slightly different locations on the staff. Why is that? Well, of course, in bass clef, the location of an F is different from what it is in treble clef. So for bass clef, again, we're still going to think this kind of general setup, but we want to still make sure that we're using F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, etc. So where is our first F sharp? Well, we're going to start kind of high. There's an F in bass clef, so F sharp. C sharp, we're still slanting down. Now we do the 3 in a row, slanting down. G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, and then finally the slant of 2, E sharp, and B sharp. All right, now I encourage you to pause the video and work on this exercise. I'll jump in with the answers in just a moment. So for your treble clef, again, pay attention to your clefs. If you want 3 sharps, they're of course going to be F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp. So where do you put them? Put them right there. So in other words, you are simply selecting the first 3 whenever you want 3 sharps, or the first 6, or the first 5, or what have you. Now for 6 sharps, there's our F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, E sharp, and we stop there because we have enough. We have 6. Then finally 1 sharp, well, of course, it's going to be right up there. For the bass clef line, F sharp and C sharp are our first 2 sharps. Then we've got a bit of a doozy here. All 7, F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp. We've done the 2, 3, and now we need the 2 slant at the end, E sharp and B sharp. Finally, 4 sharps, F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and D sharp. So you want to get really fluent with these, really quick with these, because they will come up literally for the rest of the term.